Welcome to 9WX TV here at Lakeside Classics. Don't we just love 991s? The 7th generation of 911, it was a real game changer in the 911 story. To my mind, this era is one of the best. In today's video, we're going to download absolutely everything you need to know about this generation of 911. It's the 991.1, so that's the naturally aspirated version from 2011 to 2015. We're going to run through the stats and specs on the 991.1 era, the host of options that are available over all these different models available within that generation. Let's get stuck in. So, as I said then, the 7th generation of 911 was the 991.1, and it heralded substantial change over its predecessor in the 997.2. A whole new platform. It was only the third time in the 911's history that the platform was completely revised. And as I said, it heralded a completely new era. The 911 basically got more layers, I suppose. It was always a fantastic sports car, but built into the 991 was much greater usability, better refinement, more comfort, while still holding on to the performance principles that these sports cars are renowned for. Now, the 991 generation was popular. There was over 230,000 of them produced. That does include the Gen 2 cars though. In today's video, we're just focusing on the Gen 1, so that's 2011 to 2015. It's the naturally aspirated cars, the last actually of the naturally aspirated 911 outside of the GT lineup. They are popular, they were popular when new, they're just as popular now. So we'll get stuck in, we'll walk through the lineup of the cars that we've got here in the Lakeside showroom today that basically show the full accoutrement of models within that 991 generation, but also different specs as well, okay? Literally everything is catered for here. So we'll start with the narrow-bodied example behind me, which was the Carrera S. Now, when the 991 generation was launched, at the back end of 2011, the first models that were available were rear drive only. You had the Carrera, the entry-level 911, and then the Carrera S. The Carrera had a 3.4 litre version of the naturally aspirated flat six, producing 350 horsepower. The S had a 50 horsepower kick-on, so it's 400 horsepower. Both, as I said, rear-wheel drive and therefore narrow-bodied. Manual was standard, PDK optional. We'll come on to the options a little bit later on. Now, as I said, and I'm pretty sure you can see here, completely new chassis layout. The 991 was longer than its predecessor in the 997. The wheelbase was longer as well by 100 millimeters. But also inside, it means that the interior was completely revised. The two seats in the front no longer on top of one another. There was that kind of Panamera-esque centre console running down the middle, which, to be honest, it still remains the case today in the 992s. Some key new technological aspects to this as well that were deemed controversial at the time. Electrically assisted steering, for example, which was more efficient than the mechanical power-assisted steering system in the 997s.
Some of the new tech included a 7-speed manual gearbox, active dynamic engine mounts, Porsche Torque Vectoring Plus, rear axle steering and dynamic chassis control, the latter two being optional extras.
The facts are the 991 was faster, quicker, it was also lighter and much better on fuel consumption as well. So in terms of engineering, the 991 really was a triumph. It really was as good as it looks. Right then, we've spoken so far in this video about the changes that fell on the 991 generation. Well, some things actually remain the same. It was still powered by a naturally aspirated 6-cylinder flat engine. It's the last naturally aspirated, as I said, flat six engine outside of the GT lineup for the 911. So it's, yeah, a pretty special proposition for enthusiasts like myself. It's coded 9A1. And it was DFI, direct fuel injection. Much more efficient than the M96 and M97 versions, engines that preceded it in the 996 and early 997 cars. It was also a lot more reliable as well. We'll come on to overall reliability later on. Brilliant soundtrack to these, with or without sport exhaust actually. If you've got sport exhaust, even better. And again, we'll talk about options a little bit later on. But these have a really lovely soundtrack. There's quite a difference in character between the base engine and the S actually, the 3.4 and the 3.8. I personally feel, by the way, that the base car suits a manual, the 7-speed manual, and the 3.8 litre S really suits PDK. It's a really nice revvy engine and with a really strong punch in the mid-range as well. The base car, you really have to rev it out to stay in the power band, and I think mating that to the manual gearbox and having a bit more to do, just a little bit more fun. The engines were peachy, to be honest with you, and as we'll discuss later on, there's not really a lot that goes wrong with them. The big change, though, over the 997 is this. Porsche just giving you 2 little cooling fans under the deck lid, as well as the oil and water top up. That is it. It does mean any kind of servicing and maintenance work is a little bit more involved for technicians. The whole rear bumper has to come off to get access to the engine now. It's also a bit of a shame not to be able to look at that engine in the back. I always think an engine in a sports car is like a work of art, and Ferrari, for example, has always been really good at presenting it on show as that mechanical art. So it's a real shame to have lost that for the 991 generation, but in fairness to Porsche, it's stayed this way ever since. What has changed is the placing of the engine, ever so slightly. I can't emphasize this enough. So the 991 generation is still absolutely quintessential 911. It's rear engine. Okay, rear engine obviously means, if you don't know, it sits past the rear axle of the car. Okay, so the engine has always sat here in a 911. Now, I mentioned the wheelbase extending by 100 millimeters earlier on in the video. That did bring some key handling benefits. The car quite simply is more stable. Porsche also, and this is only ever so slightly by a few mil, has nudged the engine ever so slightly forward. So it's just slightly, and I repeat slightly, more on top of the rear axle, which promotes more favourable handling characteristics and dynamics. So here's the thing, right? The 991 does look optically bigger than the 997, but factually speaking, it's a little bit of a misnomer. Across the rear, which is always the widest part, certainly up until the 992 generation, is always the widest part of the 911. Now the Carrera and Carrera S, the rear-wheel drive cars, don't forget they're narrow-bodied and they measure 1,808 millimeters across the back. It's exactly the same as the 997.2. The only differences are the 991 is 60 millimeters longer and, as I said, has that 100 millimeter longer wheelbase over the 997. So really, the wheels are kind of pushed a little bit more out into the corners of the car. And as I said, the engine brought ever so slightly forward to help with handling and dynamics. Interestingly, and considering the 991.1 has more tech on it over the 997, the 991 is actually lighter than its predecessor as well, by 35 kilos for the Carrera, 30 kilos for the Carrera S. How has Porsche achieved that, you might ask? Well, chiefly it's to do with the multi-material makeup on the 991, which was a big leap over the 997. A real mix of steel and aluminium all over the car, with a different production process as well, basically using less bolts and more welding. The multi-material makeup of the 991 is an act of genius, actually, that kind of goes under the radar, but really does help make up the fact that the 991 is pleasingly a lighter 911 than its predecessor. It was actually the last 911 to be lighter than the generation before it. So the coupe arrived at the end of 2011. We only had to wait until 2012 to get our first open-top flavour of the 991 generation in the form of the Cabriolet. And it has to be said, the 991.1 Cabriolet is another fantastic example of Porsche engineering. Big changes again, and all for the better. As you can see by this lovely Carrera S Cabriolet at Lakeside Classics, with ceramics, by the way, a £6,000 option when new. So as you can see with this car, the Cabriolet again is a real triumph of engineering, because Porsche successfully managed to meld, for the first time, open-top 911 motoring, which, with the roof up, gave you that classic coupe-like silhouette. The roof was completely redesigned in order to achieve that coupe silhouette, which was always like the chief criticism, really, of the Cabriolets. It didn't carry that 911 coupe look, that timeless look that Porsche has worked so hard to protect for the last 60-odd years. The 991.1 generation absolutely achieved that and nailed the brief. The roof carried a unique four-piece design for the first time, which allowed it, when stowed, to sit out of harm's way behind the rear seats, and with the roof up, gave that timeless, as I said, coupe look. This could be done via a button on the centre console or on the key, which I will show for the benefit of our friends in the US, because for whatever reason you didn't get that.
And here's that Cabriolet roof system in action.
Super duper. So it's lovely to take a seat inside the Cabriolet now. So as we've seen, the roof goes down in just under 13 seconds. Again, you can do it on the move as well, which is great, up to 30 mile an hour or 50 kilometers an hour. There are key practicalities with the Cabriolet, and the Cabriolet is actually my favorite open-topped 911 variant for a number of reasons. The first one is the fact that it has or maintains that coupe silhouette. I still think it looks really purposeful as a sports car with the roof up. But it's just the practical element of the Cabriolet. It involves this, the wind deflector. It's standard spec on every 911 Cabriolet. They all come with them. But it basically eliminates pretty much completely wind buffeting in the cabin. It really is that good. You could be driving along at 70 mile an hour, the speed limit in the UK, roof down, and with that up, you can have a really nice convivial conversation with your passenger without having to fight over any wind noise. It really is that good. It raises and lowers. We'll see if this does it. It raises and lowers pretty simply from the centre console, and that's it. So that's your full Cabriolet experience. But again, if you value any conversation with your passenger, I recommend putting that up. So that is the Cabriolet. I really like the Cabriolet, actually. I loved it from launch, and I love it just as much more than 10 years on. It's the ultimate all-round 911, I think, really. The Cabriolet was available in two-wheel drive, in four-wheel drive, form, manual or PDK, so you could completely choose the spec for you to shoehorn into that Cabriolet body style. Even something as extravagant as this, which has ceramics and Burmester, by the way. PDK as well, as a host of options on this. It's really well spec'd, and I just think it's a really nice place to be. It gives you everything that we love with that 911 package, with the roof down, and as we're going to find out later on, it just means you get to hear more of that sonorous flat six noise. So for me, a 911 Cabriolet is genuinely a car I would love to own at some point, but the Cabriolet wasn't the 911's only open-top offering. Porsche also delivered this, the 991 Targa. God, it's done my back in a bit, actually. So the coupe came along in 2011, the Cabriolet in 2012. We had to wait to the end of 2013, so model year 2014, to get the 911 Targa. And I have to say, its concept is genius. I'm sure we've all seen the kinetics or kinematics of this roof in action in the 10 years since this car has been out. We'll roll it again shortly, but I just cannot believe that Porsche has managed to concoct this design from what is a blank piece of paper. Or is it? Because actually, what you're looking at here is a fantastic, brilliant, genius melding of 60s design, a la the original 911 Targa, melded with the brilliance and efficiency of modern technology. What that gives you is a return to the original Targa roll bar design, absolutely timeless among 911 fanatics, with some practicality, because with the old Targa, as good as it looked, the problem was a practical point of view. The roof had to be stowed manually with you standing at the side of the road. Now, if you live in a place like the UK where it's just as likely to rain as not, it's quite a dilemma, and I'm certain there were 911 owners over the years stuck at the side of the road, frantically trying to put their roof up. I don't mind sharing with you now, I very recently drove a G-body Targa. I was caught out by the rain. There seems to be a pattern here. I was caught out by the rain. Genuinely, by the time I'd managed to put the roof on, which I would argue is a two-person job, by the time I'd put that roof on, it genuinely stopped raining again. So you can save yourself all that hassle with a 991 variant.
The roll bar has a brushed aluminium look, just like the early classics, alongside those three gills and the iconic Targa script. The The Targa's roof is operable via the centre console or remotely via the key. However, unlike the Cabriolet, the Targa had to be stationary when the roof was in operation due to the clamshell folding out past the car's rear clusters.
In terms of practicality as well, there are some wins. For example, as I mentioned earlier in the video, driver visibility all round is far better in the Targa than it is in the Cabriolet with the roof up. The bit between conventionally what we call the B and C pillar is a complete blind spot in the Cabriolet with the roof up. That rear window is quite small, whereas on the Targa you really can see all around thanks to that glass clamshell. The Targa was all-wheel drive only, which utilised a pretty special and innovative all-wheel drive system for the 991 series at large, and we'll talk through that now.
The 991's innovative all-wheel drive system, named PTM Porsche Torque Vectoring, featured a multi-plate clutch whereby torque was constantly and infinitely variable between the front and rear axles. That said, the 991 was still predominantly rear-wheel drive under normal driving conditions. On the 991, you could see the system in action with a live display via the car's digital screen on the instrument cluster. The weight penalty for an all-wheel drive 991.1 compared to a requisite rear-wheel drive equivalent is approximately 50 kilos.
The Targa is a sensational looking 911 in 991 form. They really did nail the SP, as I said. Practically though, for me, it's more of a boulevard cruiser. The 991 Targa really, like all its predecessors, roll bar predecessors I might add, carries that inherent problem of wind noise at higher speeds. So for a boulevard cruiser, this is absolutely the 911 for you. If you're perhaps a little bit more enthusiastic about pushing on and using a 911 as intended, it does feel quite heavy, and there is that wind buffeting problem, which I've always found to be detectable around 45 mile an hour and above. Now, Porsche has, for the 991, installed this breaker bar here, which basically spoils the wind and attempts to knock it up and over the roll bar and not land behind you there. I don't find it particularly useful. It does make a difference, but only a small difference. I think what also helps is by just knocking the windows down by about an inch either side. But the reality is, roof down in this car is reserved to boulevard cruising or driving around town. That's probably it. Again, though, a fantastic proposition, and allows you as a consumer to choose the right open top 911 for you. However, when it comes to the Carrera derivatives of 991.1, Porsche's definitely saved the best till last with the GTS models.
Yes, the best of the Carrera range was to arrive in 2014 with the Carrera GTS models. First introduced for the 997 generation beforehand as a run-out special, for the 991.1 the name GTS essentially became a sub-brand in its own right, offering a greatest hits package of options as well as some unique features across coupe, cab and Targa body styles, rear-wheel drive and all-wheel drive, and both PDK and manual gearboxes. In short, any previous iteration of 991.1 Carrera was now available as a Carrera GTS. It was and still is a smash hit among enthusiasts. Its spec included a 44mm wider body with a wider track to boot, Sport PASM chassis, Sport Chrono package including Sport exhaust, the X51 power kit, Sport steering wheel, Porsche Dynamic lighting system, plus revised styling including Sport design front and rear bumpers, Sport design side mirrors, satin black body accents, smoked rear lights, as well as those beautiful 20-inch centre lock wheels.
So it really is the most incredible package in what was pretty price friendly. If you wanted to spec up a Carrera S to GTS spec, well, A, it would cost you far more than the 10 grand or so to buy a GTS, but also there were certain specification points on the GTS that you just couldn't spec on an S. For example, the centre lock wheels.
The GTS is my favourite 991.1 Carrera derivative, so let's take it out for a spin and get to know it a little better.
So look, it's only fitting that the car we drive as part of this 991 special on IMAX TV is a GTS, because it really is the pinnacle of the generation. I mean, you contrast that to, I'm just going to sort my mirrors out. You contrast that to the 992.2 generation when the GTS came out before the Carrera S. It's become a sub-brand in its own right, and that's fine because they are really a fantastic specification, but these cars here, 991.1, was definitely of the era where the GTS was the run-out special of that generation. It was the best of, and that's why there are parts of this specification on the GTS that you can't get on an S, such as the centre-lock wheels, for example. Okay, so yeah, we're going to explore how this car drives very shortly, but just as a reminder, so this specific car, rhodium silver, it's rear-wheel drive, as we said earlier on, rear-wheel drive, it's still wide-bodied regardless. I mentioned this being rear-wheel drive and PDK. Before the power is put on the road, the power needs to be made, and that is done via that 3.8 litre naturally aspirated flat six, the last naturally aspirated Carrera derivative of 911. But the GTS basically fuses that 3.8 litre engine with the power kit that boosts power by 30 horsepower, up from 400 horsepower on the S to 430 horsepower here in GTS specification. Textbook power kit really, just absolutely strong and characterful throughout. And there again lies the magic of this car in the power kit. The reality is the power kit has died these days at Porsche. It just does not exist. Since the Carrera range adopted turbocharging, you can't get a power kit anymore. You can't get an X51 power kit, for example, on a Carrera S or 4S. Literally does not exist. This generation is the last generation where the power kit was available, and it was available as standard for the GTS models such as this. I think the power kit at the time was £9 grand. So it's punchy, it's rare on something that isn't a GTS, but it was part of what made the GTS so special. And again, I'm going to point out, you know, the power kit is was a complete reworking of the flat six engine. In the successor generations to this car, so 991.2 and 992 generation, the GTS basically was bigger turbos and a remat. That got you that kind of boost in power compared to like the Carrera S and 4S equivalents. But on this car, obviously no turbos to rework. It's a complete mechanical overhaul. So proper Porsche engineering at its finest. And as I said, it's something that just does not exist anymore. It's been eroded from the Porsche catalogue and the Porsche conversation at large. Yeah, so I was saying, I did a similar video around about a year ago here at Lakeside with the 991.1 GT3, and I harped on in that video about my feelings when driving the 991.1 GT3 when new, and how driving it 10 years later just brought all those amazing memories and emotions, more importantly, right back to the fore. It really is the same here with the 991.1 GTS. We did some great stuff content-wise with those cars 10 years ago now. And it really was like the pick of the bunch of the time, because it was so successful to my mind in bridging that gap, which was always the GTS remit, between the Carrera S and the GT3. It was more usable than the GT3 day to day, but just more visceral than the Carrera S. And that really is like the very best description of the GTS, particularly in 991.1 form. It's got a frankly raucous sounding exhaust note to it. Which revs all the way to 7.5 grand. I'm not going to go near that today. I mean, it sounds brilliant. It's a fantastic soundtrack to this car. The likes of which we've not heard again. The big criticism of the time was the steering with the 991.1. It was said to be not as feelsome, and that is valid. There definitely successors improved the steering feel in 991.2 and definitely in 992 generations. But Porsche engineers did work on the feel of the 991.1 GTS and improving it over the Carrera derivatives that come along previously. I completely do not have an issue with the feel and feedback of the system in the .1. Sport and Sport Plus though, Sport Plus, I'm not even going to go near that on the road. That's for track use. It won't change gear until you basically hit the red line. It's completely superfluous in today's setting, although a future owner can absolutely make use of that. Let's stick it in Sport and see what the response is like. Maybe for a fair test, let's put it in fully automatic mode. So it'll just change up earlier, it'll hold on to gears for longer. Really lovely fluid steering. Decent throttle response actually in sport mode, noticeably improved. Oh yeah, noticeably improved actually. And this is what I mean, many layers. We're doing a very brief drive here, again, like respectful of the low mileage this car has. I just think this is brilliant. And for what, half the price, comfortably, of the latest GTS iteration? It does sound so good. It's noticeable how different the car is in sport mode, it has to be said. Slightly more noise as well, like on the overrun. Throttle response is definitely, the wick is turned up on that. Very fortunate driving a lot of these cars. You know, and it's one of them where it's like 101 Dalmatians. If you could have them all, you would. But there are some cars that just land differently and that you really remember. And just this short drive, I've done 14.2 miles, and everything I remember and know and love about this car has come flooding back in those 14 miles. These are exceptional cars. Really nicely judged, really nicely balanced, just a wonderful fluidity to it. Let's head back to Lakeside before we start trying to do any man maths. That would not go down well at home.
Before we wrap this video up, let's have a chat with Henry and Danny from Lakeside for their specialist take on the 991.1.
We are both 991 owners, bought Gen 1, so this is biased. But
for me, I think it could be the greatest platform Porsche's ever made. So I think, and I'm sure you will have spoke about it today, but the platform is so robust in what it does. And we were talking earlier about performance level as well. The bandwidth of what that car can do is sensational. That 991.1 Carrera S is faster around a track than a 997 GT3, faster around the Nürburgring, yet can deliver on a day-to-day basis the way it does. I think it's just the perfect 911 recipe.
I find it so difficult to say which generation is my favourite or whatever, because it's the generation I'm in at the time. You know, I could love a 993 or whatever. But when you're looking to daily a car and you're looking at residuals and what Danny just said, engagement, I mean, with the naturally aspirated of the 0.1, it doesn't, for me, it hasn't got better since then. You know, turning everything off and just hearing that and putting it in Sports Plus mode and hearing, you know, you change gears up and down and the natural noises that the engine make. I don't think I've been more satisfied with newer models past that. However, as we were discussing before, with such thing as a Gen 2 or a 992, it's lovely to have that later tech. But now we've retrofitted CarPlay. You've got, you know, the old noise that we love, the engagement where it's not too quick and you can have fun at those lower speeds, and you can, you know, you can benefit off the later technology.
Danny, you and I were talking off camera about, I mean, they're pretty bulletproof, like mechanically. There's only a couple of like minor foibles that you guys have kind of come across over the years dealing with them. Do you mind touching on that, just for people?
Yeah, that's it. So I think the major things we see with those are faults caused by the changeover valves on the end of the vacuum lines. That's probably the biggest faults we find. But like I was saying to you, it doesn't really affect the operation of the car getting you there. The car will always still get you there. It's just, it's going to show that warning. So you had the coolant one, didn't you, on yours for a while, and it was just that changeover valve needed replacing. I think the rest of the things on these cars tend to be service items. So we were talking about the upper sumps sometimes leak because that gasket dries out and wants replacing, condensers, coolant pipes, stuff like that. All of those things, I think, on a 10, 12, 14-year-old car, they're just regular service maintenance items. In terms of actual mechanical failure, it's very, very limited. We've not come across any 991 generation car that's had any serious mechanical failures. So they're really, really robust. We spoke about active engine mounts, and in the 140 something odd cars that have gone through here this year, we've done one to one of our cars and one to a 997. So they're not, and we were having that conversation, weren't we, on the forums? Nobody ever goes online and writes, my padding's worked great for the last 12 years. Yeah, that's it. They'll just go, my padding's failed. So I think there's so few foibles in 991, so few things that go wrong with them. They're just so robust and well put together. And I think if people do that preventative maintenance through time, those cars will hold up particularly well.
As I mentioned earlier on in the video, I'm very lucky in the fact that I've done 100,000 miles in 991 generation 911s. That does include the Gen 2, by the way. It's for a number of press car loans over the years as a journalist, and thanks to the kindness of owners borrowing their cars as well. So despite having never owned a 991 myself, I have done a lot of miles in them and I've lived with them over the years. I genuinely think they are a sensational 911. I think they're peak 911 in terms of engineering mixed with feel and engagement. I think looks-wise, the 991.2 just sharpened things up. Aesthetically, it's a really nice package. But in terms of delivering on what a 911 should do, in my opinion, especially in the modern world, which is like deliver richly on performance, engagement, comfort, and luxury, I really do think the 991.1 is the ultimate. A brilliant soundtrack, dynamically capable, fun and engaging on the road, and the right mix, really, as I've said on other videos on this channel, between tradition and modernity. I just think these cars have absolutely got it nailed. Mechanically, as the guys have said, there's not a great deal to go wrong on them. You hear of the odd dynamic engine mount that goes, as the guys have said, but it's held up pretty well. And again, considering these cars are just over 10 years old, to me, they don't look it. They still very much look like a modern 911, really. Inside, the build quality is fantastic. Plenty of these were used as daily drivers, considering how well-rounded they are. There's nothing wrong with that. With higher mileage cars, I'd want to see a really good service history just to make sure that car is looked after. The cars that have done the miles are going to have need the work just to replace those consumable items, which all add up. Think condensers, brakes, lower wishbones or lower front arms, for example. Otherwise, they're brilliant cars. If it were me, what would I like to get? Well, for the driving enthusiasts, I'd get this, a GTS Coupe. Just some other observations I think is worth pointing out because there's so much to choose from here. Kind of muddling through it all can be quite complicated. I would say if the majority of your driving is on the road, I wouldn't get too het up on having a rear-wheel drive over a 4. You have to be really pushing on in the 4 for the all-wheel drive system to start compromising the purity of the drive, okay? It really is that good in the 991 generation. And to be honest, the extra sure-footedness of that all-wheel drive traction may come in handy in less than ideal conditions. So definitely don't rule out the all-wheel drive cars. I also think they look stunning with that light bar going across the back as well. Staying with road-focused driving, a lot of people spec ceramics. They were a £6,000 option at the time. I personally think ceramics suit a PDK car. Steel discs suit manual cars. And again, for road driving, the reason I think that is ceramics are so clinical, there's really not a lot of pedal travel, which is counterintuitive for heel and toe. You want the pedal travel to be able to get your foot over. So if you can find a 7-speed manual, and they were rare, despite the fact that it was the de facto choice, PDK was a £2,500 option for the 991.1. Porsche did very well out of that, didn't they? That's what I'd be looking for. In terms of gearboxes, PDK is fantastic. People will always rave about a manual gearbox, a stick shift in a sports car. The 7-speed gets better over time. The early models that I drove were quite clunky. I'd expect that to be a lot more slick now with some miles on the clock. The reality is PDK is absolutely awesome. It allows you to do everything and do it well, from performance driving to bumbling around town. It really is that good. If you can find a car with Burmester, great. Otherwise, the Bose option is more than enough in terms of audio. The other thing is a lot of these cars were so well spec'd. So Don't get hung up too much on the specification of a car. There'll always be another. Go on condition. Condition, condition, condition. That's pretty much it for this 991 Ultimate Guide, I guess you'd call it. Thanks to the guys at Lakeside Classic for throwing open the doors and giving us the keys to all these lovely 991 models. You can check them out on the Lakeside Classics website and also on the Nineworks Marketplace. Before we go, can we just show some appreciation for the immaculacy of how these cars are lined up down here? That's the sort of detail I'm here for. But anyway, thanks very much for watching this video on Nineworks TV. If you have any 991.1 ownership experience, please do share it in the comments below. I'm certain I would have missed loads because there really is that much to discuss on these cars. So pop it below for the benefit of others in the community. We'll see you again soon on Nineworks TV.